For many years, Ground Zero has had a working astrologer that we love to bring on the program all the time. It's Robert Phoenix, robertsphoenix.com. He's exploded onto the scene as a disruptive force in the realm of the mundane, global astrology over time. He's read over 7,000 personal charts for clients. He's got a Virgo sun coupled with an X-ray vision brought on by Scorpio rising. Astrology has given him a powerful tool to spread a lot of great truth on the radio. So without further ado, we bring on Robert Phoenix. Hey, Robert, how you doing today?
Well, I'm great, but the first thing I want to say is happy birthday, Clyde.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. I was talking to you, what was it, a few weeks ago, you were talking to me about my Saturn return, but I didn't realize there was a Pluto return for the country and for the world, and I think you need to explain what a Pluto return is so that people understand why this is such a significant day.
So the Pluto return, theoretically, Pluto has a 248-year cycle in orbit. And if you look at where Pluto was in February of 1776, this is really when this Pluto cycle that we're talking about begins. And it doesn't really end until January of 2024, because this is when we finally have Pluto separating out from the final 2 degrees of Capricorn. So on this day, Pluto returns to the same degree that Pluto was at when they began the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I think that, that process took, 3 or 4 weeks. It's like they didn't just sign it all in one day.
Right.
They had to accumulate more signatures. So, but it begins this process. It begins this declaration that, this country is going to claim its independence, which is pretty ironic because if you look at what's happening with Russia, it almost on the same day you have these 2 regions of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, and essentially what they're doing is they're claiming their independence. It's kind of weird and paradoxical and ironic that it's Russia that is in some ways instigating this idea of independence, or at least recognizing the independence of these 2 little microstates. So it's this strange mirror that's going on because this is where theoretically Pluto, this will be Donetsk and Luhansk is Pluto, right? So if they survive as countries and they go through their own Pluto return cycle, it will be synced up with the same cycle as the United States. So we're dealing with these kind of mirror images of independence. So what's interesting about the 27th and the 28th degree of any sign is that the energy of that sign becomes very volatile, and there's a lot of static energy, because if you look at how a sign progresses, it starts off at the 0 degree of that sign, and then it goes through the next 29 degrees. So by the time you get to the 29th degree, there's absolutely no energy left in that sign. And so the next degree over would be the next sign at 0 degrees. So it's like the birth of a new sign or the birth of a new star. And that 29th degree, it would be somewhat similar to like a black hole. Like there's nothing there anymore. And then the 27th and the 28th degrees are these supernova degrees where the energy gets pretty wild. And so we have that in the chart for this country at the 27th degree of Capricorn. And I think it's been an interesting ride because, democracy, or this idea of this this country that has evolved over this time, or de-evolved,
right,
which is probably more where we are right now, has always had a very volatile relationship with things that represent corporations and government. So we've had things like the Federal Reserve come in 1913 in the dark of the night in December 25th or 24th, or the Christmas Eve, and it's a country that's had a lot of union strikes, with the automotive industry and Ford. So we see this very volatile relationship with these superstructures. And then when we get to the 1980s, it becomes even more volatile when outsourcing and globalism sort of takes hold, right? So
Right.
we've always had this uneasy tension in a lot of ways with these superstructures, and that has a lot to do with this 27th degree. But as it relates to where we are now, we're in a process. Like, this process is just starting, because Pluto will go direct and retrograde over the course of the next 2 years. So it's going to come back and hit this 27th degree a few more times before it's all said and done. But today is where we initiate that process. And I think some of the things that you touched upon in your opener, which was great, by the way, has a lot to do with, well, where do we go next?
Yeah,
Right?
because I was like, we're in this dominant transition code with the, I guess you could say, the numeric codes that are power numbers and the Vision triplicity that we see. But just the idea that the stars and the planets and the arguable planet of Pluto returning and bringing with it the idea of leaders dying on their thrones, empires crashing, foundations cracking, and narratives cracking. I think that this is where we are, and landing on this day is very significant because it's a power day to begin with.
Absolutely. And when we deal with Pluto, we deal with death. I mean, this is what Pluto represents. It represents death and hopefully some form of rebirth. So the question is, what is the death? How does it look like? What does it look like? What are the factors that initiate us through this passage, right? Because we are going through a major passage.
Is the illusion going to be lifted? I mean, the idea that, because I remember there was a story that I read once where they said that Rome had been dead, but the politicians and the bankers were dancing on its corpse for a long time before the people realized that the country had died, or that the Roman Empire had died, and they moved and annexed to other places like France and England. And now here we are looking at our empire crumbling with our leadership that doesn't seem to want to govern. All they want to do is create war theater, and to say so makes you sound like you're a traitor. But no, this is war theater. This is, like I said, the Schrodinger's cat version of war. Is it or is it not war? Well, they want to make it sound like it's war. They kind of want to say it's war, but they don't want to say it's war. And peace is still on the table if you want it, but no, this is transition.
Well, it's a huge transition, and you could go all the way back to 2020 when all of this started. And we went through the COVID madness and went through the summer of George Floyd. And there was a war, and the war was on the American people. And we saw statues being toppled and cities burning, and people in fairly high places taking knees.
Yeah.
So we went through a revolution. We went through a purple revolution during
Right.
that time. So we have been at war. And in some ways, we're still at war, but it's a different kind of war. It's maybe fifth, sixth generation warfare. But I do think that what you're talking about with the illusion being revealed is an interesting question.
Right.
Because on July 4th, there is another aspect to Pluto at 27 degrees. It's part of one of these retrogrades. And one of the things that's happening on July 4th is that Neptune, which is a planet that represents illusion, to your ruling planet in Pisces, also spirituality, illusion, esotericism. It's a planet that represents kind of these extremes of heaven and hell, right?
Right.
So we've been in Neptune, under the spell of Neptune, since 2011, right after Fukushima happened. So what's happening on July 4th is that Neptune and Pluto are in what we call a sextile. In astrology, that's a sympathetic or harmonic relationship between two planets. But both planets are retrograde at that time.
Tell you what, why don't you give us the significance of this? Because I know people are planning their calendars. We already, I remember months ago, talked about this date. Now we're moving into July and what's going on with Pluto there.